So, what if I told you that some of the most important documents in Western civilization weren't grand treaties or, stuffy philosophical books, but were actually just letters, basically mail, sent from a leader trying to manage a whole network of brand new communities from hundreds of miles away? Okay, let's get into this because these letters are so much more than ancient history. They're like a masterclass in building a community from a founder who was facing some truly unbelievable challenges.
I mean, you got to picture the world we're talking about here, the Roman Empire. It's this massive, powerful, sprawling entity. And right in the middle of all of it, a series of very personal, very practical letters written by one guy, the Apostle Paul, start making the rounds. It's kind of wild to think about, but these letters would eventually become a huge chunk of the New Testament and lay out the fundamental blueprint for Christian communities for the next 2,000 years.
So, who was this guy, this incredibly influential figure? Well, he didn't start out that way. He was born Saul of Tarsus, a brilliant, highly educated Jewish leader. But here's the twist. He was actually dead set on crushing the very movement that he would one day come to lead.
You can really see his whole life story in these 4 key moments. Around 33 AD, he has this massive, life-altering experience that just completely flips his entire mission on its head. A little over a decade later, he's traveling thousands of miles planting new communities all over the map, places like Galatia, Thessalonica, Corinth. Then, for the better part of the next decade, while he's still on the move, he writes the very letters we're talking about. And get this, even at the end, locked up in a Roman prison, his main tool for leading and encouraging these communities is still a pen and paper.
What's really fascinating here is just the sheer scale of what he was trying to do. Paul wasn't just starting one little group. He was planting an entire network of communities, or churches, in major cities all across the Roman Empire. And, as you can imagine, that created a huge logistical problem. And this map really drives home the challenge he was up against. I mean, look at this. From Jerusalem all the way to Rome, these little communities were separated by enormous distances, totally different cultures, and really difficult, dangerous travel. He was their founder, right? So he felt responsible for them. But there was just no way he could physically be there to guide them day in and day out.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question. How did he do it? How do you possibly lead and correct and encourage dozens of groups when you're literally cities or sometimes even entire provinces away from them?
He wrote letters. It's that simple and that revolutionary. But these were not, abstract theological essays. No way. They were practical, they were direct, and they were laser-focused on solving the specific, real-world problems that were popping up in these communities. Think of them like troubleshooting guides, leadership manuals, and messages of hope all rolled into one package.
So, let's dig into the first major bucket of problems Paul had to deal with: internal chaos. Because these new communities were, they were messy. They were struggling with infighting, ethical confusion, and even leaders who were twisting his original message.
A great example of this is in his letter to his apprentice, Timothy, who was in the city of Ephesus. Paul just cuts right to the chase. He identifies the problem. Some people are spreading false teachings, getting sidetracked by myths and endless debates. But his solution isn't just to yell, "You're wrong." He course corrects by reminding them of the whole point of their faith, which is love that comes from a pure heart and a sincere faith. He's constantly pulling them back to what really matters.
And this right here gets to the heart of Paul's whole philosophy. For him, what you believe and how you behave were completely connected. They were two sides of the same coin. He understood that what a community believes in its heart will directly shape how it lives and acts out in the open, in its city. This wasn't some academic debate for him, it was the absolute foundation for building a healthy community that could be a force for good.
And a huge part of protecting that foundation was having good leaders. In places like Ephesus, Paul gave Timothy super specific instructions on how to appoint leaders, people he called overseers and deacons. And for Paul, their character and their integrity were completely non-negotiable. This was his boots-on-the-ground strategy for making sure these communities would be healthy and stable for the long haul.
But the problems weren't only coming from the inside. These communities were countercultural. And in the Roman world, being different often meant facing some pretty intense hostility and even persecution from the outside world.
And this was no small thing. For a lot of these early Christians, choosing to follow Jesus meant they were risking their social status, their jobs, and in some cases, even their lives. The pressure to conform was constant, and in some places, it was getting really, really bad. So what was Paul's prescription for dealing with all this external pressure? Well, if we look at his first letter to the church in Thessalonica, we see this powerful 4-part strategy emerge. First, he celebrates their faithfulness. He pumps them up, he affirms them. Then he tells them to double down on loving each other. Next, he constantly reminds them of their future hope, giving them a bigger perspective beyond their current struggles. And finally, and this is the really radical part, he tells them to meet all that hostility not with more hostility, but with grace and generosity. It was a strategy designed to build incredible resilience.
So when you put it all together, you take his advice for handling the internal chaos and the external pressure, what you start to see is a powerful and honestly timeless blueprint for what it actually takes to build a healthy, resilient community.
We can really boil his wisdom down into 4 key pillars. Number 1, clarify your core beliefs, because what you truly believe is going to shape everything about how you live. Number 2, appoint good leaders, because integrity and character are everything. 3, serve the wider world. Paul was always pushing these communities to be known for their good works and their generosity to their neighbors. And number 4, persevere with hope. Having a clear vision for the future gives you the strength you need to get through the challenges of today.
So this all brings us to one final thought. When we stop seeing Paul's letters as just chapters in a book, and we start seeing them for what they were, real mail, addressing real problems for real people, it just changes everything, doesn't it? It invites us to read them differently, to ask, okay, what was the problem Paul was trying to solve here? Because when you understand the why behind the words, you unlock a much deeper, more practical layer of wisdom that's just as relevant for anyone trying to build something meaningful today.